There's a lot of things that scientists understand about the brain. They know what cells it's made of, how those cells communicate with each other, and the general function of specific brain regions and the connections between them. But despite all of this knowledge, there is still no theory that explains how all of that stuff in your head works together to make you, you. Like, there's no single concept that explains how the parts of a brain, the neurons, and the structure of those neurons combine to make thoughts and feelings and an overall sense of self. And that's kind of a problem because while scientists can study individual parts of the brain and even make some really big parts work in a lab, they still don't know how all those parts fit together. It's like trying to understand how a car works by studying each of its parts in isolation, but never actually putting the whole thing together. But now, thanks to a new paper published in the journal Neuron, we may be a step closer to figuring out that big picture stuff. Researchers at the Salk Institute have proposed a new theory for how the brain works as a whole, and it starts with an unlikely candidate, the cerebellum. The cerebellum is the part of the brain that you probably already know as the little engine that could. It's the structure at the back of your brain that helps you do things like walk and make precise movements. But in the last decade or so, researchers have found that the cerebellum also plays a role in things that we traditionally have unassociated with it, like language processing and attention. In fact, the researchers from this new paper argue that the cerebellum is kind of like the CEO of your brain, managing and coordinating all of the other parts. And like a good CEO, it does this by making lots of connections. The neurons in the cerebellum are connected to almost every other part of your brain. So the researchers hypothesized that the cerebellum uses those connections to keep track of what the rest of the brain is doing and make sure everything is running smoothly. To test this idea, they built a computer model of the brain that took inspiration from the structure of the cerebellum. In the model, the cerebellum was a network of interconnected nodes that sent signals to the rest of the brain, just like the real cerebellum. Then the researchers had the computer model process some simple visual stimuli like lines of different orientations and colors. And lo and behold, the model started to exhibit some complex behaviors. For example, it began to group similar stimuli together and made new connections based on those similarities. Like when it saw a red vertical line, it would activate the neurons that had processed a blue vertical line a moment before, even though it hadn't seen that particular combination before. In other words, the model was able to take all of the pieces of visual information and put them together to form a coherent whole. Now, obviously, this is a very simplified model of a very complex system. But the researchers think that their model and their paper are a step towards a unified theory of brain function. Now, they need to figure out how the CEO in your cerebellum is actually able to do its job. But if their new theory is right, understanding how that little part of the brain works should give us a big picture understanding of how your brain works.